Hello and welcome back to Imagination Mansion. So as my first video of 2025, I thought I would go through sort of like my best of 2024 in what I read. I had originally thought like, oh, I could do what some people do and like do like everything that I read. But then I looked at the length of their videos and also thought about the amount that I read, which was about 70 something. And I was like, no, that's never gonna get done. So we're going for a top 10. The only order that is to this is the size, because there are some behemoths at the bottom that I cannot put to the top or it would crush everything else. And it's a mix of fiction and non-fiction because that's what I read. And yeah, let's get started. So first up is K Tempest on Connection, which is this little one here. This was a very interesting book. I kind of like read it when I was traveling to see a friend, and it is all about connection, and it's all about how even though we've got so many things that differentiate us, and we are different and we are unique and stuff like that, there's something about creativity that is such a shared thing. Say you're reading a story and it's not your upbringing, there's still some of it you can relate to because we're all human and we're all creative, and that was kind of like the message of the book. I'm not doing it much of a service, and I also like read it like June last year, so it has been a while, but I do remember really enjoying it, and I do remember that it was sort of like that, yeah, the connection is creativity and that's what makes us human. That's that one. Next up is Artificial Intelligence, A Guide for Thinking Humans by Melanie Mitchell. It's very different, this one. So as it says, this is all about AI, and it's quite a chunky one, but it is also quite small. So it's one of the Pelican books. And it was so interesting because it goes into a lot more depth than some of the other books on AI I've read. And it goes into the history, it goes into the science. It's not too technical, like you don't get bogged down in like equations and coding language and all that kind of stuff, but it's definitely a very, very deep overview, and I really enjoyed it and I found it really insightful. Because of the way that AI works is slightly out of date because it was made in 2019, but I still think it's a brilliant read to get like an overview of sort of like where it's come from and where it was going, and then you can kind of deduce where it's going from there. So yeah, it's that one. Next up we have Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth. This one. So I do love Jules Verne. The ones that I've read before this one were 80 Days Around the World, that was my first one, and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I somehow missed this one. I don't know how, but I think I went into it with slight predictions because I'd watched the Brendan Fraser film, which is sort of like based on this book. So it's basically like this was a real adventure and they're following in their footsteps. But because of what happens in this book, they've added to, and the storyline of the film's different, so they've added stuff to it. So I was expecting some stuff to be in it that wasn't, but like that was on me. That was on me thinking it was going to be like the movie for some reason. Like I don't even think it's like the old movie because they've thrown a rivalry in there that isn't in this one. But I really enjoyed it, and I love especially science fiction and fantasy writers that you can tell are just nerds, and this is like their way of like nerding out. Because it's literally like, he'll be like, oh, why do we have to go on this adventure? We're all gonna die. And this is the rock structure in Iceland, which I know some people don't like. And I know that some people find it quite dry, but I honestly love it. So, next up is Orbital by Samantha Harvey, which is this one. It's just a little tiddly one, this one. It's not very big. I've got the shortlisted edition, but it did actually win the Booker Prize, which was quite nice. And honestly, after reading it, I can understand why, because it is, I think poignant is the right word to use. It's just beautiful, I guess. And looking, yeah, see, that's what people have written on the back, is like, it's just like somehow they've distilled humanity by sending them into space. And I think that's beautiful. It's like we're almost like our most human when we're on the edge sort of thing, because that's where like the best in us comes out. Because it's basically about some people who were on a space station above Earth and sort of like what happens and what they can do and what they can't do. But it's just written in such a lovely, like, not poetic, like it is prose, but yeah, I'm not doing it a service, but yeah, I really liked that one. So next up, I'm cheating a little bit, because next up is a series. It's a trilogy. It is a children's trilogy. These are technically 5 to 8. They're really good. As someone who likes D&D, I think these are a great story, and I think if you've got a kid that likes the idea but is not quite old enough to play it yet, or, you know, can't find a group or anything like that, these are definitely like a first foray into it, and also an interesting foray into it, because it's set in a monster academy. So like the things that the heroes in D&D usually fight, and there's such a band of interesting characters, because you've got like a human posing as a minotaur, you've got a vegan owlbear who are usually like monstrous hunters, and then you've got a kobold, and you've got a mimic that can't turn into anything dangerous, so they're usually a book. And I just found it such a beautiful story. So I won't go too much into the story, but you've got the first one, which is sort of like her discovering herself, especially like her origins, so to speak. And then you've got the second one called, so that one's No Humans Allowed, speaks for itself. This one's Tourney of Terror, where we get the dragons, which is always fun. And then last up is they go up against a dracolage. So you do kind of have to suspend your disbelief at a bunch of children fighting such a dangerous monster, but the way that it's written does make you able to do that, I think. And it's sort of like, it makes you feel like these are the only people who would be able to do that. And I love them so much. And because they're quite short, they're quite easy to reread as well, because like I said, there are 5 to 8. They're only about, that one's about 200 pages, that one's similar, and this one's 260. So they're not very long, but I love them. Great story, great characters, especially if you love D&D, they're great, but even if you don't, I think they're really good as well. So next up is Steeplechasing Around Britain by Church by Peter Ross, which is this one. So I read this one quite early on in the year. I think it was like even maybe this time last year, but I loved it because it's less focusing on the religion aspect and more about the community and the actual churches and how we look after like dilapidated buildings, or don't, as the case may be, and how they're sort of like centers for community, and how even if you're not religious you can find some solace there almost. But I really enjoyed it, and I really liked the way he wrote it and the sort of like interviews that he gave about the people that look after them, the people that just visit, the people that just happen to be around them or work in them. And if you like churches from a religious point of view or just like a historical or architectural point of view, I think this is a great book. So next up is a sequel prequel, which is Bookshop and Bone Dust by Travis Baldry. So I kind of went into this kind of knowing I'd like it because I'd read Legends and Lattes, and this is absolutely just as good as the original, and it matches the style, the characters work, because the Legends and Lattes is like after Viv's retired, and this is sort of like she's gotten injured, so this is between missions. But it's still got that same soft energy, it's still got lovable characters. Viv is the same as ever, if not a bit more battle ready, because like I said, she hasn't retired yet. But I really, really love this one, and if you're looking for cozy fantasy, this and Legends and Lattes are a great one to go for. Next up is Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth I by Tracy Borman, which is this one. This is a very interesting book actually, because I'm not usually that interested in the Tudors themselves. I think mostly because it feels like we did it to death in high school. Like, we rarely did medieval or Middle Ages. We just did Tudors, and it was sort of like, I'm kind of fed up with the Tudors. But this one was so interesting, because even though they didn't physically know each other for very long, because I think Elizabeth was only like 2 or 3 when Anne Boleyn died, it was still so fascinating at how she tried to keep that family connection alive, and how actually Anne Boleyn was actually a good mother for the time that she was allowed to be, and sort of like how she kept it in the family, and like that was one way to honour her, was to like honour her family when she was queen. And it was just so interesting, and I am so happy that there does seem to be more books on the women in history now, and how we are looking into more depth about how, you know, that they were characters within their own right. They weren't just so-and-so's wife or anything like that. Like, I think Elizabeth I definitely had a bit more attention because she was a queen in her own right, but Anne Boleyn, I think, is finally being picked out of just that, oh, that's a shame. She seemed or, you know, she seemed nice or she seemed horrible, whichever camp you end up on, you know. But yeah, so if you're into that period of history and you're into historical women in general, definitely an interesting book. Next up, we have The Story of Art Without Men by Katie Hessel. You can't really see the without men bit, but it's in like white font here. This was so interesting because I have actually read The Normal Story of Art by, I can't remember who it's by, I'll have to look it up and put it in the description, but I've read that original one, and apparently it was only by the 16th edition that they put like one woman in it, even though, as this book shows, there were plenty. It follows a very similar structure in terms of it goes through the eras and the time periods and the sort of like cliques, I suppose. And it has pictures and it has text. It is now out in paperback, so you don't have to get this massive behemoth one, because this is quite heavy. So it is out in paperback. And I do also like love these big splits in it. Yeah, it goes into depth for the ones we know more of. It mentions the one we know less of. It also mentions things like textiles and photography and stuff like that, which I quite enjoy. And yeah, if you're interested in art and you want the full picture, this is definitely a good one to read. And last but not least, an absolute behemoth is The Posthumous Papers of the Manuscripts Club by Christopher D. Harmel, which is this one. It is quite large. Once again, this is now out in paperback if you do not want to read it this large. But this was, I loved reading this. It took me a while, as you can see. It is quite large, but also interspersed with this is like full pictures of the different manuscripts and stuff like that. And it was such a beautiful book, and I really, because I'd read the Bookseller of Florence, which is, he's in here. So I already knew I was kind of like interested in sort of like ancient booksellers almost, but some of them are actually not modern, but in not ancient or Middle Ages by any stretch of the imagination. And it's basically about like how people rescued manuscripts, bought manuscripts, sold manuscripts, looked after them, and sort of like kept that trade alive. And yeah, if you like books about books, this is definitely like the ultimate one, and I love it. So that's that one. So that is my top 10 of 2024. What am I reading at the moment? I am reading, just get the dust jacket, Black Holes by Brian Cox and Jeff Forshaw, because it's a bit technical at the moment, but I'm getting through it. And then I am also reading a book on blue stockings, which is sort of like the women who started getting into education in the 1700s and 1800s, which is once again quite interesting. That's sort of like my bedside book, because I can't try and read this just before bed, my brain will explode. but that one's definitely a bit more historical and sociological, so I can read that one before bed. It boggles my brain less. Let me know what you think, give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe, because I'm going to be trying a new format on this channel, which is monthly favourites, which sounds very 2014, and it kind of is. Some people are still doing it, but it's basically a way of me giving myself structure, so I have something to make a video on every month without staring at a blank page and crying. 2, I think it gives me a more rounded approach to what I'm doing, because at the moment I'm just talking about books, and though I do love books, you know, I work at a bookshop, it makes sense, and I am surrounded by books, I do also like other things. Like, I like games, I like music, I like anime, I read manga as well, so maybe I can put some of that in here, and I guess it just lets me talk about more things in a format that doesn't feel forced. Because I think if I wouldn't have that much to say if I tried to make a video on each one of these things, which is why I think I've been struggling with the bookish stuff, because I'm trying to do exactly that, make a video on just books, and I'm like, I don't have that much to say. Like I guess I'd count myself as part of the booktube community, because I do talk about that, and I do, as you see, have a lot, and I do read a lot, but, you know, I guess trying to just stick to only that is making me struggle a little bit. So if I make more videos in between those, great. If I don't, at least I've got that structure. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, give it a subscribe so you can catch those videos when they come out. And yeah, I'll see you hopefully at the end of the month. Bye bye.